throughout the show right now. Let's talk to Niall Dickson. He's Chief Executive of the NHS Confederation and joins us now. Good morning to you, Neil.
Good morning.
Good morning. Well, obviously a lot of people focused on the joy of 6, as a lot of the headlines have called it today, being able to meet with other households. Do you understand what the difference is of why it should be a group of 6 or a group of 8, and why we were ever told it could only be outdoors somewhere else, not in our garden, but now a garden is okay, and why in Scotland it's from today and from in England it's from Monday? Is there any particular scientific reason that you're aware of at the NHS Confederation for those differences?
Most of the ones you've mentioned, no, I'm not aware. I think we can certainly make the case quite clearly that where the R rate, that reproduction of the virus rate, could mean that you would ease lockdown at a greater or a faster rate depending on what was happening within a local area or within a region, as it were. So I think that's a reasonable thing to say, but frankly, the difference between 6 and 8, or indeed because Scotland has now called it trace and protect as opposed to test and trace, or they've called it test and protect, I think. These are differences that there's no reason for it. And I suppose it is the price we pay for devolution. These are different administrations. They want to do their own thing. They want to show that they're doing their own thing. But I think for the most part, and I think this is a positive thing, that the 4 administrations of the UK have pretty well walked in lockstep, and sometimes the differences are not as great, perhaps, as they might seem. I think the worry is, of course, that people will get confused. Maybe it'll encourage them to look more closely at what the guidance is for their region. I don't know the behavioural science around this, to be honest.
Yes, I'm assuming the Monday rule for England, which is the vast majority of the population of this country, is simply they know some people are going to do it this weekend anyway, but you're going to try and limit the number of people who do it this weekend by telling them, the rule is you can do it from Monday. Of course, it's going to be a scorching hot weekend. It's going to be very tempting. Let's talk about that R rate. We heard from Chris Whitty and Patrick Vallance at the press conference at Number 10 yesterday that the last week that the R rate was between 0.7 and 1, massively varying depending whether you're in a care home or you're in a different part of the country, but now 0.7 to 0.9. The understanding was that when the 5 tests were met, that we would be rather a lot below 0.9. That's sort of tantalisingly close. Patrick Vallance talked about us proceeding cautiously. Are you concerned that actually we're coming out of lockdown a bit too soon?
Well, I'm not going to challenge the scientists on this, but I think they are recognising that the R number is not far off 1 in any part of the UK, as far as I can see. And at the same time, we have to recognise that reinforcing and getting people to social distance and so forth becomes more difficult as you ease lockdown. So I think keeping a very close eye, and if you look at those 5 tests that the Prime Minister talks about, it's the 5th test is the one that I think causes us just to pause, and that is the 5th test is that this would not risk a second peak that would overwhelm the NHS. Now, the other 4 appear at the moment to be being met, but you have to keep a really close eye on this. And the other issue, I suppose, that is some concern, because we're all in new territory. I'm not saying they've made the wrong decision, but actually reversing is going to be even more difficult. We know that easing the lockdown is more difficult than imposing it. If you were then to say, now we're reimposing a series of things that we used to have, but we let off, and now we have to reimpose it, I think, again, that's likely to be quite difficult to do. But again, you'd have to ask the behavioural scientists around this. I think on the NHS side, we would say there are enormous pressures at the moment. There's all that unmet demand waiting to try and be met, and we're still trying to cope with very significant numbers of COVID patients, and most hospitals are part COVID, part non-COVID, and that presents its own really quite serious challenges.
And that is exactly the sort of green zones and red zones. And obviously there's been some issues about this contact tracing system, whatever we're calling it this week. People worried they're not getting enough training, that workers weren't able to log on. Dido Harding saying that it's not going to be fully operational until the end of June. Now this is going to be a real concern, isn't it? People getting their tests as soon as possible, getting an answer yes or no, then knowing who to trace, getting that test result back within 24 hours. Ideally, they're trying to develop this test, antigen test. Have you got the virus now or not? That you can have effectively instantaneously within 20 minutes. That would be a big difference, make a big difference to how the NHS has to actually handle these cases, wouldn't it?
Yes, the test and trace programme, which is admittedly a massive thing. They're trying to set it up at speed. I think somebody described it as, trying to fix the aircraft while they're flying, or actually make the aircraft, manufacture it when they're flying at about 35,000 feet. So there's no doubt about the challenge of it, and we can argue about whether some of this should have been set up earlier. I think the question now is, I would listen to what Dido Harding says, dare I say, rather than the Prime Minister, because she is saying, as I understand it, this is, it's going to be tricky, there are going to be difficulties, there are glitches in the road, all those kind of stuff, which is what, in a sense, we'd really like politicians to say more of, instead of saying, we will have a world beating this, or we will solve that, or the PPV will arrive on Monday and save the day. And it's obviously a temptation for politicians to both set goals and make boasts about things, but it would really be more helpful just to say, actually, this is going to be quite difficult, don't expect everything to be wonderful just at first. And I guess the question is, are we reducing the lockdown at the right speed in proportion to having the test and trace in place? And I think we'll have to see that. And of course, reducing the lockdown itself is a gamble, because we inevitably can't know how people are going to behave. In terms of simple lockdown, they behaved better, I think, than the behavioural scientists and everybody else thought we would. So we were more compliant. Whether as we ease the lockdown we will be more or less compliant, I think is a moot point. I simply don't know the answer.
No, indeed. And just in terms of where we go from here, in terms of what the next stages are, as you mentioned, hospitals are trying to deal with not just the COVID patients, and again, some parts of the country very few, some parts of the country a large number, and of course that does involve so much more social distancing and so many more difficulties for the staff. But we have got, as you hinted at, this issue with the ongoing other health problems, and there's this fear that the excess deaths from people not getting cancer treatment, not going to hospital when they think they may have had a heart attack and the like, the routine treatments for the diseases we get every day, that's not happening. How soon can that be up and running? Because a lot of people are really concerned at the fact that we're going to lose more people to that over the years than we're going to lose to COVID.
Yes, so it will have to be done in a phased manner. It will have to be some services brought on more quickly than other services, simply because restarting these things, getting the right service, and of course maintaining social distance kind of rules as well, restricts what you're able to do and so forth. But the NHS and I believe staff, there are surgeons who are just itching to get back into operating theatres and so forth. So the NHS will definitely do its best. It has had a letter from the centre saying these are the priorities, these are the areas which we expect you to start working on. But and so that is happening in hospitals and in all the other services across the country as we try and switch this stuff on. But A, it'll take time. B, there is just a natural backlog because of stuff that's not been done, operations and so forth. But there's also whatever the lockdown has created in terms of the mental health problems, all the stuff we know about domestic violence, all the stuff that we know about people not accessing help which was there, but they're just too frightened in order to engage. So the challenge going forward, and of course at the end of all this, a looming winter, because it's nice now, but it won't be very long before the weather turns, and again the NHS will be, as ever, under huge pressure. And
then, of course, the older flu cycle as well. Thank you very much indeed, Niall Dickson, Chief Executive of the NHS Confederation.